How much do you really know about Watergate? You know the name. It's so baked into our culture that the suffix gate is just a shorthand for scandal in American life. Gamergate, Pizzagate, Bridgegate, Donutgate. But why did the original gate, the plumbers breaking into the Watergate complex, actually happen? One of the show's writers, Alex Gregory.
To this day, they didn't actually know why they were going in. They were going in to find something, and they didn't know what. And you realize Nixon didn't even know what. The whole thing was fear-based.
I'm Olivia Nuzzi, and welcome back to the White House Plumbers podcast from HBO and Campside Media. This episode, we'll be talking about the plumbers' 4 separate attempts to break into the Watergate complex.
Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Watergate office building, home of the Democratic National Committee.
Very nice, boss.
Okay, first I want to give you a quick recap. Episode 1 showed the beginnings of a bromance between Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy. Episode 2 demonstrated their competency as a team. Now, with Episode 3, the director, David Mandel, went for something very different.
Episode 3 is kind of like a heist movie unto itself. There is a Ocean's 11-esque feel to it, and heist movies have rules. You know what I mean? You have to know.
What are the rules?
Well, you have to know that, like, that's a timed lock or there's a guard here. So in this case, we needed to know there's a guard at the front of the lobby. There's an elevator. We got to get up to the 8th floor, but there's people working up there. We're going to hide in the basement. What do you mean in the basement? What are you going to do? We're going to hide in the banquet level. So you're trying to kind of, let everyone know where everybody is. We're trying to get up there. Oh my God, they're still working. There's a guy here. We've come in like this. Those become your rules, and that's kind of what gives you the tension of the heist.
There's a 24-hour guard in the lobby, so I found us a back door.
Back door? Unit 2, what back door?
We talked to the White House Plumbers writers, Peter Hike and Alex Gregory, about crafting the heist. Pete said that the first challenge was just doing the research.
So it was the deepest of dives. You would read all the different biographies, mostly autobiographies, and you would have to try to figure out who was lying the most, because everyone had different versions of the same event. Very Rashomon. So you would go in and say, okay, here's how Liddy describes this break-in. Here's how Hunt describes it. Here's how McCord lays it out. So that oftentimes was the challenge, is everyone had written a book about it, and everyone's book would have different takes on how it went down. I think it was Muscolito, one of the Cubans, who gave one interview once, and it laid out tons of amazing information that no one else had talked about in their books. So you would find these nuggets, and Alex and I would get so excited, like, okay, I just did this deep dive and I found this one interview with this one Cuban, and it reveals a whole nother break-in we didn't even know about from all of the autobiographies and all the stacks of books.
I found us the perfect place to hide and wait on the banquet level.
Unit 2, where the hell are you going to hide on the banquet level?
Simple. I booked a banquet room.
The first attempt at the break-in was our favorite, because setting up a fake banquet in the basement of the neighboring building that had a secret passageway up was actually a pretty smart idea. It's a good plan. It was Transpo Week 72, and they had newsreel footage of like transportation stuff, because there were a lot of people in town for this. So they had Dorothy do a lot of research. I think she booked the room, and they found out like the secret passageways. So the entire plan was actually very well set up. Everything was lined up perfectly. They just had the lookout, and they were going to say, as soon as it's all clear of the DNC, we're going to go up. And they kept working later and later. So they got trapped in that room, and they did get locked in. And Howard Hunt does urinate in a whiskey bottle.
Christ, I gotta take a leak.
Yeah.
And then when he finds Liddy back at the Watergate hotel room, he says,
Whatever you do not drink the whiskey at the Watergate.
like, all of those things legitimately happened. But especially at that first attempt, there is a world in which it goes according to plan, and no one ever knows. It's just that one didn't work, and then the plans got subsequently worse and worse and worse, with the desperation of Liddy just saying, we're going back in. We're just going straight in.
Here's Alex Gregory, the other writer.
Multiple break-ins really provide a nice structure for one episode, because one break-in wouldn't really do it, because they were so botched that it was the cumulative effect of botch after botch after botch after botch. The second break-in attempt is the thing that we found in the Muscolito interview. Hunt and Liddy kind of allude to them trying again, but don't say how it didn't work. And Muscalito lays it all out. They got briefcases. They're like, we're going to go in through the front door. We're going to say we have a meeting. We're going to go up to the 8th floor, and then we're going to walk down.
Can I help you?
We have an appointment. Federal Reserve Office, 8th floor.
At midnight, middle of Memorial Day weekend?
International business.
And the moment where Muscalito looks at Hunt's bag and the tag is still on it, and Hunt says, nothing I do is accidental. Everything I do is on purpose.
You left the tag on. Everything I do has purpose, muchacho.
Hunt really said that to him. And so we thought, like, what a great character thing of a guy who believes that nothing he does is accidental. That's insane.
There's another funny moment that we asked the writers about. Liddy shooting out the light in an alleyway.
Nice shot, Halcone.
Apparently, that actually happened.
Yes, Liddy climbs on Sturgis' shoulders to shoot out a light because it was illuminating the back alley too much. And some of these things you feel like he was doing it because he thought it was good for the mission, and sometimes I think he was doing it just because it was cool. He wanted to impress the guys that he was a good shot, because he would talk about, and there's a thing we talked to Throw about how good he was with his gun. He would always have it on him in his holster, and his ability to pull it and have it cocked and ready to go in less than a second was like one of his greatest prides, was his constantly being armed and ready to shoot. It was another element that we really underplayed in the show, but he had so many guns all over his house all the time, and his kids were shooting it. It was a house full of real guns. We're writing that in originally, and then it was like, man, that is a really tough character trait. You know, it's sometimes less Liddy was more, and in this case, showing him with like the legitimacy of 20 firearms are littered around his house, ready to go in case anything went down, seemed almost too far to push the audience too soon.
One thing the show makes clear is that there was a dedicated team who performed the break-ins. Here's a few names for you. Bernard Barker, Eugenio Martinez, Frank Sturgis, and Virgilio Gonzalez, also known as the Cubans. Bernard Barker and Hunt went way back. They'd worked together for the CIA in Cuba before the Bay of Pigs invasion. Barker helped Hunt recruit guys from the Cuban exile community onto the team, most of them also with CIA ties. He even brought in a familiar face. He and Martinez had worked for Hunt and Liddy on the ill-fated Fielding break-in in LA. Here's Peter Hike again.
Every time the Cubans show up, they really were like funny and ridiculous, and this group of kind of goofballs. And then one of the things that we set out to do was having all of the Cubans be played by real Cubans. And for all of them, they said they'd never been a part of a show where the parts were all Cubans played by real Cubans. So they could do Cuban slang, sing Cuban songs, make Cuban jokes. So throughout, we have them just jabbering with each other. We're like, fill it out, make it real. You guys would have inside jokes and moments and connections.
No, Gordon, this is a Cuban locksmith who can't pick a lock.
Sandwiches, gentlemen. Turkey, ham, tuna fish.
Muchas gracias, Dorothy.
We joked around a lot. I mean, it's a fun group of people. We had the freedom to improvise stuff. You had real Cubans, so you wanted to let them be Cuban. That's what David wanted.
This is Yul Vazquez. You might recognize him from Severance or Succession, but in White House Plumbers, he plays Bernard Barker. Barker was a tough guy. He fought in World War II, survived a year in a German prisoner of war camp, and then was a CIA asset in Cuban dictator Batista's federal police. At the time, he thought the gemstone operations would help the liberation of Cuba from the communists. Later, he'd say to an interviewer, "Washington's a place to keep away from. Cubans don't do very well up there." Yul told us that he was thrilled to take on the role of Barker.
I have a pretty funky look, don't I? I have a bald cap and a comb over. I mean, I have 3 hours of makeup, and then the glasses, and then all the other Michigan. It's a madness. I think it's the biggest transformation in the show. When I saw pictures of Barker, he seemed to be like an economic person. Like when he spoke, it was direct, and it had a reason. And he looked very serious to me. And he looked really scary. And this weird sort of overweight, balding dude with these glasses, but he had a gaze, that was kind of terrifying.
Yul had actually worked with the show's producers before. In fact, he and Dave Mandel went way back.
My first contact with him is in Seinfeld. I did this crazy character on Seinfeld, this like crazy militant gay dude called Bob the Intimidating Gay Guy. That's actually the name of the character. He steals the armoire. I mean, this guy's a wild character. And I was working with Frank Rich. I did an episode of Succession. And Frank had said to me, hey, man, did you read those? I think they sent me all 5 episodes. And I go, I haven't had a chance to read them. And he said, it was just a very honest thing to say. He said, hey, whether you say yes or no to the project, just read them. They're really worth reading. And I read them, and I was like, this is amazing.
To Yul, the story wasn't just well-written. It was personal.
I came from Cuba when I was 3 with my mother, my grandmother, and my sister, and I was the only boy and the youngest in the house. So imagine what that does to you. In a Cuban home. It's like being a prince, I think. I mean, it's probably like what a sultan feels like when he's 3, My uncle was in the Bay of Pigs invasion. So my mother had gone to visit him at La Cabaña prison in Cuba, which he spent 2 years in. I used to try to get my uncle to talk to me about the Bay of Pigs and the CIA and all that stuff. And my uncle, he'd give you 5 minutes, and then he would say, like, no, let's not talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. Because I'm sure you're aware what actually happened. So those men were trained and then stormed the beach, and then JFK pulled the air support. The pilots were waiting to go, and when the orders weren't coming, some of these guys had tears in their eyes. They're like, those fucking guys are waiting for us. And we literally hung them out to dry, which is made clear in the show. We don't like JFK. In fact, I think we say fuck Kennedy like 1,000 times.
Viva Nixon! And fuck Kennedy.
Fuck Kennedy!
There's actually a funny story about this fuck Kennedy scene that Justin Theroux told us about. Remember, Liddy is the one who starts the fuck Kennedy chant. But apparently, Justin just could not get the line through his head.
I kept saying fuck Nixon. I think that was what would happen. I blew a bunch of takes. I kept fucking it up and saying, and fuck Nixon too. And they'd be like, no, it's fuck Kennedy. And I'm like, oh, fuck, yeah, that's right, fuck Kennedy. And I don't know, I just, for some reason, couldn't get it in my head to say, or maybe subconsciously, my Democratic leanings were showing themselves and I just couldn't say fuck Kennedy. I don't know what it was. There was a lot of blown takes at a lot of times. Like, I was the one that set up the line and I kept fucking blowing it.
So the Cubans are clearly a farcical group. But because of Yul's background and knowledge of the real guys, he felt that it was important to imbue Barker with some gravitas.
From the beginning, I said to David, I'm not interested in any shenanigans with this. I didn't want Barker to ever be perceived with any sort of slapstick. Because while what they did was a complete disaster, it is buffoonish. There's a part of this for me that was really fucking serious. Like in Miami, these guys are heroes. They're like revered. So it was important to me that we get the guy right, whether people like him or not. I think the Cubans have been glossed over a lot, and they're a key component to the story. Because when Hunt is looking for guys he can trust, that's where he goes. He goes to these guys. He could have gone to a bunch of CIA guys. He goes to these Cuban guys. One of the reasons I believe he goes to the Cubans is because it was personal for the Cubans. Anything that was anti-Castro, anti-communist, the Cubans signed up for it. They did this because they thought it was a patriotic act. They were like, we want Nixon to win. Nixon was a guy that was very plugged into the Cuban community, and the Cubans loved him. I think maybe some folks don't know the very deep Cuban exile connection to the Watergate incident. When I read those stories, it was personal to me, like because of my Uncle Ray, because of the Bay of Pigs, because of my history, because of everything that my family went through. I'm honored to play these guys, and I jump at the chance to play them, and I feel like it's a therapy session. 90% of this interview will be on the cutting room floor. Doug is like, erase all that. The guy took 87 gigs of nonsense. Who cares about his childhood?
Meanwhile, back at the heist, most of episode 3 happens at the Watergate. For Mandel, it was important for viewers to get a sense of the place.
I think in the real world, the non-Washington, D.C. sort of folks, like they think of the Watergate as a single, like it must be an office building. It's like the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, the Watergate. And
imagine something flatter and uglier.
And then but then you just see this thing, and you're just like, I don't understand. Which one is it? It's all of it.
Can I ask a question? I said it. Which one is the Watergate?
Anastasia White, the production designer, was responsible for overseeing all of the sets that you see on screen, from the Hunt and Liddy homes to the interior of the Watergate. She told us a little bit about constructing it.
The DNC we actually built inside of an old Verizon office space upstate, and that was probably the most challenging set in a way because we had a limited amount of time to convert 3 floors of the office into what we needed as far as the Watergate office complex. We had a floor plan of the original DNC, and then we based our floor plan inside the Verizon office building off of the floor plan of what existed. And there's a diagram of where the bugs were planted and where they were caught. So we just kept all of that in mind and got as close to it as possible. When it came to like the really iconic imagery that people have, we really needed to get it. And that's why we ended up going to DC to shoot the actual Watergate instead of finding a garage in the Hudson Valley to do it. And then we ended up shooting the real lobby at the office as well. And that's how we transition. Once they get in the elevator, the doors open into our Verizon building set. So we cobbled all those pieces together.
The break-ins were all about showing Watergate.
We also talked to Steven Meizler, the DP on the show, about the process of shooting the Watergate.
It's this massive Gaudi-esque building, and it's kind of amorphous. There is the business, there's a hotel right behind it, which is why is a hotel right behind it? And then there's apartments around it, and it's the architecture, like the balcony looked like it has teeth on them. To me, I wanted to really show what Watergate was as its own character. We're so grateful that we actually shot that at Watergate, because at one point we were planning on connecting all the pieces with CG and green screens, and it never would have looked and never would have had the feeling of there.
When they were working on the set, the production design team referenced a photo of security guard Frank Wills. He was standing in front of the actual door where the plumbers broke in. Anastasia told us that she wanted to recreate the entryway as precisely as she could.
We found the exact door. You could tell from the photograph of Frank Wills standing in front of it that it was the same entryway, but there were a lot of pieces that were missing. So we added the rolling door on top of their door so that if you look at our still and the historical photograph together, you'll think that they're the same thing, or you'll think that it still was left like that.
I live in DC, and in Washington, the Watergate looms. Apartments on one side, a hotel on the other. I haven't stayed in the Watergate Hotel myself, but I have been to the spa there. I remember being in the steam room one time when I was just overcome by the strange history of the location. A few levels below me, a few decades earlier, this is where the presidency ended. And now I'm here getting a massage? This shoot was the first time there for most of the members of the cast, and some of them did actually stay on the premises. Here's Yul again.
We stayed at the Watergate Hotel. I stayed on the second floor. My room was down the hall from what's called the Scandal Room. It literally has a plaque. It's this room where they were like listening and looking. That's the crazy room where they hatched the whole stuff. So I was like, my God, I've read about this room. And I believe it's the opening shot of All the President's Men. There's a light, and you can hear a conversation that's happening, but you don't see it. You just see the light in the room, but you know the conversation's in the room. So here I am, my hotel room, is down the hall from the scandal room. And I literally would get out of the elevator and I'd always like walk by it and just look at it and be like, this is where it went down. This is where the madness went down.
I asked Toby Huss about it too. In White House Plumbers, Toby plays James McCord Jr.
I want to get those mics working. It's a point of professional pride.
Had you been to the Watergate before?
No, I hadn't. I hadn't been there before.
He did not seem impressed.
What do you think of it?
Well, it's a fun hotel. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. The Sunday buffet is exceptional. Do you know what happened, too? What's a great thing about it in that little complex? It's a weird complex, the Watergate complex. It's not just a hotel. They have all these businesses in there. And I broke this tooth out of my head years ago, and I have a veneer on this one tooth. And we were all going to go see a museum one day. And I think I had corn on the cob at lunch when we were shooting. And gadunk, the next day we were driving to go to a museum. I just felt something wiggle. I went, oh, no, dunk. And I took off my veneer and I went, all right, I got to get out and get this thing done. So we called a couple dentist places to get it. Well, okay, one was 8 hours away and I was shooting the next day. Like, we got to get this thing glued back in my head because we're shooting. And I went, wait a minute. And I Googled the Watergate dentist, and there was a dentist in the Watergate complex, like 60 feet away. So I walked over. He went, oh, hey, how's it going? You shooting the thing? Yeah. Doink, they glued it back in, and it's still in. It's a weird place, yeah. But it's much weirder. Any place you get your tooth glued back in your head becomes a weird place. It was weird on top of weird.
During our conversation, I got something I was not prepared for. A song.
At one point, I think in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, we had to make up some little song, like about anything. And kids were, singing songs about Jesus and how swell he was to them. And I wrote a song about Hollickman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, and Dean. I did. It went Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, and Dean went for a ride in the flying machine. Haldeman fell out. Ehrlichman was a sellout. And Mitchell and Dean turned into a bean. And maybe I was in 4th grade or something. It's a truth. Yeah, it was a weird thing. And then all these years later, there's Mitchell, there's Dean, there's Ehrlichman. What the fuck? What's happening to my strange life?
Dental emergencies aside, the cast said it was fun shooting in DC. These were long days on set, and still, they found ways to keep it interesting.
We pull up to the Watergate, and we get out of the car, and Woody has a briefcase, and it's empty. And then in between takes, Justin would fill it with sandbags, and the briefcase kept getting heavier and heavier. I'm in the front seat, and I knew what was coming. And Woody's like, son of a bitch. I mean, but he played it like there's nothing in here. Like he just took it like a champ every time. He just took it like a champ. Every time he'd be like, no, I can handle this. And it was probably like 25 pounds of sandbags in there or something. There was so much of that. We'd get in this elevator and we could just go back down and reset just back down one button. But I think Woody or Justin would hit every button in it, and then we'd have to stop at every floor. And it was just like, which is great, but when you're in that bulb cap for 15 hours, you're like, really? Come on, fellas.
Now I want to take us to a particular moment in the episode. It's after the 3rd break-in attempt, and Liddy wants to go in one more time. Hunt refuses at first. He's like, no, I'd rather go to Paris with my wife and kids. I talked to Mandel about this scene.
So there's the big scene in episode 3 in the mall where they're walking, they're arguing.
I'm going to Paris with my family. Fuck Paris. Your country needs you.
They argue and they sit down. And that scene is probably my favorite scene in the whole show. Just that conversation that they have. Because I love where those two guys get. Working with Justin on that day, what became interesting to us was when Liddy talks to Hunt, he's talking about Hunt, but he's talking about himself. And that's where you actually get to see that little kid, that little scrawny kid from Hoboken. And he gets so hurt and, dare I say, emotional in sort of why he feels they have to do this, because it's to prove to everyone in the world that they're important. And I think even Justin would say this. He went into this trying it a little differently, trying it without some of that. And we took it to that place. And I love that we took it to that place.
So that's it? So just going to let them win, huh? Who wouldn't? Who? The Democrats? Fuck them. If they elect McGovern, then they deserve all that's coming to them. I was talking about those son of a bitches from the Cosmos Club.
At this point, we're starting to see cracks in Hunt and Liddy's bromance. But still, the partnership prevails.
You're better than that. You're better than him. Thank you, partner.
So, there they are the next day, in the command room of the Watergate Hotel, as the rest of the team attempts a fourth break-in. But the tape on the door is gone, and they can't get in.
Not on me. The tape on the door was gone. Security? You'll see.
Whatever. We couldn't get in. What do we do, boss?
McCord, Sturgis, and the Cubans come up to the hotel room and ask Hunt and Liddy for their next move. Alex, one of the writers, described this as a pivotal moment for the pair.
That is kind of the moment where their romance ends, is Hunt says, we're stopping, and Liddy says, we're voting. Again, that happened. Liddy overrode him, and the rest is history.
Okay, we do it.
Fantastic.
Qué bueno. Gracias a Dios. Se me va a pagar.
The episode ends soon after, on a low point. The bromance is over. Hunt and Liddy failed. The burglars got caught. But there is a question that lingers. Why did the team want to break into the Watergate in the first place? Here's what the real Gordon Liddy said in a 2008 interview.
When I was called in, forget exactly when, by Magruder, and he said, can you get in the Watergate? And I said, well, yeah, we can probably get in the Watergate, but, you know, why get in the Watergate? It's not on the plan. We haven't budgeted for it, and so forth. And he said, well, I want to know what, you know, Brian's got right here. And he took his hand down, he hit his lower drawer in his desk. And I knew that that's where he kept whatever negative information we had about the Democrats in his possession.
Here's Alex, the writer again.
We referenced the fact that Magruder called Liddy into his office and said, I want you to get into this drawer, the bottom left-hand drawer of Larry O'Brien's desk.
Which drawer? Bottom left. Why? What's in the drawer? That's what he wants you to find out.
To this day, no one knows what he thought was in the drawer, but Larry O'Brien had worked for Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes had given Nixon a bribe before the 1960 election to Nixon's brother to bail out a Nixon burger franchise, literally Nixon burgers. That came up in the campaign, and Nixon thought that that was the thing that had cost him the election, not him sweating on camera and being far less likable than John Kennedy. He blamed the whole Howard Hughes debacle. So it's possible that he feared that O'Brien had more Hughes information in his desk. So all this was like, he was ahead in the polls, but he's like, what might they have in the desk?
Even Liddy didn't seem convinced that they would actually find anything. Here he is in that same 2008 interview.
Because I said, you know, there isn't going to be anything there. O'Brien's not there. And, you know, this was just this wild goose chase as far as I was concerned.
There's one crazy thing that happens during these break-ins that I want to bring up, because it's pretty key to understanding Watergate conspiracy theories. And that is McCord wandering off during the second break-in attempt.
Hey! What the? Larry? Jim? You scared the shit out of me. What are you doing here?
In the show, McCord bumps into two security guards and tries to say he has a meeting at midnight.
Looks like my guy didn't show. I'll give him another 45 minutes or so. I'll just wait on the couch there.
Ed, this is Jim McCord, John Mitchell's bodyguard.
No, not anymore.
Well, like so many other improbable sounding details from the show, that actually did happen. That account came from the same Muscolito interview that Pete and Alex were referencing earlier. Muscolito said he remembers going up to the 8th floor at 2 a.m. to look for McCord and found him talking to 2 guards as if he knew them.
McCord never fully explains why he wanders off. Even in his book, he does wander off and he recognizes 2 guards on the 8th floor. And they recognize him, and he has this bizarre conversation with them where he tries to keep them occupied. It is one of the most spectacularly weird things, all true. It happened exactly like that. He might have simply heard something down the hall on the 8th floor and thought, I better go check that out. It might have been as simple as that. It's easy to ascribe all sorts of motives after the fact, but it could have been as simple as that.
Honestly, that moment of him wandering off and leaving the group is one of the reasons people think he was trying to sabotage the mission. He didn't support it, and they left the tape on purpose, that he wandered off, that he was actually looking to undermine the operation, not actually help it through, that the bugs didn't work. All of his mistakes, you think, if this guy is a high-level professional who's worked at the FBI and the CIA and was Martha Mitchell's bodyguard, that he would be this consistently inept is hard to fathom, but I do think that was the case. I don't think he was intentionally undermining it. I think he just screwed up over and over again and was a true oddball.
McCord's habit of wandering off is also something that Liddy recalls in his account of the operation, too. And it's something that really got on his nerves. So, was McCord actually trying to sabotage the whole thing? We had to ask Eric Graff, our go-to Watergate historian.
We probably will never know the true motive of the Watergate burglary on the night of June 17, 1972. We have shorthanded for 50 years Watergate as a bugging operation. And that's probably part of the answer, but not necessarily the full answer. One of the things like the show hints at, but doesn't come out and say explicitly, is that there were probably actually multiple schemes unfolding inside the team of burglars that night, not all of which they all knew about each other. And all of that is sort of, wrapped around this sort of yet another level of riddle and enigma and mystery, which was the CIA actively trying to undermine the Watergate burglary that night. And was Jim McCord actually working on behalf of the CIA that night to sink the burglary and get the burglars caught? There is a long rumored and never quite proven theory that he had an accomplice waiting across the street that night who was sort of helping him stake out what was going on. So there's a lot of weird mystery around that night and the motives of why and what and who knew what.
So we still don't know if there was any real practical reason for the plumbers to break into the Watergate. Were they after a specific piece of dirt on the Democrats? Maybe in retaliation for the ITT scandal we saw in episode 2? Or did the Nixon administration believe that the Democrats had dirt on the president and that they were going through the same kind of tricks that the plumbers were using against the DNC? And was McCord an undercover CIA agent working to derail the break-in? Or was he just screwing up like the rest of them? There's an Italian saying I think of often as it relates to American politics. The fish rots from the head down. The simplest answer may just be that this was Nixonian paranoia. Everyone was just acting like the boss. Whatever the plumbers were after, if they even knew what they were after, they almost certainly did not get it. In the end, all the subterfuge and break-in attempts, it was all for nothing. Here's Mandel again.
I like working on large, dry erase boards, where you can kind of outline it.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, that's how I like to do it. But at the same time, those dry erase boards sort of exist in my mind. I know this sounds really stupid. I can remember my Veep boards. I can remember Seinfeld boards. I mean, it's like just how I see shows and structures. Like I can remember the boards at all times. I think when we came out of those sessions, what happened was the heist, the actual multiple break-ins, becomes the midpoint. It becomes episode 3. And so you have the first 2 episodes as you're climbing up the mountain, then you have the break-ins, and in some way, right in the middle of that episode, when they break in for the 3rd time and they think they planted the bugs and everything is working and they're really excited and they're dancing on the rooftops and they go over. Imagine, if you will, that's the high point. That is the best it ever was for Hunt and Liddy in this sort of storyline.
Yeah.
So it's almost right there in the center of episode 3. And then begins the downfall.
Next week on the White House Plumbers podcast.
For most of the fall of 1972, the Nixon conspiracy and cover-up holds. It was never inevitable that Watergate becomes a national scandal.
The story takes a tonal shift. It is a farce that ends up a tragedy, and you have to honor that.
I loved the marriage. It was such a shitty marriage that they both held on to for sort of self-serving reasons.
I wanted the gut punch. I was looking for that suddenness to just kind of create something that just kind of was, what the fuck was that?
Make sure to catch next week's episode of White House Plumbers on HBO or stream it on Max. The White House Plumbers podcast is a production of HBO and Campside Media. This episode was hosted by me, Olivia Nuzzi, and produced by Natalia Winkleman. Hannah Baker is our story editor. Our associate producer is Charlotte Morley. Fact-checking by Annika Robbins. At Campside Media, our executive producer is Josh Dean. Editing and sound design by David Devereaux. Additional engineering support from Ewan Lai Tremuin. Special thanks to Michael Gluckstadt and Savon Slater from the HBO podcast team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
HBO Max becomes Max, starting May 23rd.